Since the last video on colouring this piece of pixel art, I was pleasantly surprised that the amount of likes and views have ticked up again, so I'm happy that many people seem to be enjoying this series. This is the fourth video where I have begun gradually transforming a sketch that I made with real pencil in a real sketchbook into a piece of animated pixel art. I planned for this video to be the fourth of what will be a total of 5 videos. The first video covered how I took a pencil sketch into Deluxe Paint to serve as the outline for this scene, as well as why I no longer stream from here in Japan. The second video covered shading, as well as some commentary on why I almost stopped doing pixel art in 2020. The third video part concentrated on the animation of the background, with layers of parallax, and how I used solely Dpaint to create that effect. In this fourth part, I will discuss some of my animation techniques as they relate to this scene. The character is my skateboarder OC Saki Endo, riding in her friend's Mitsubishi Starion through a night scene in Tokyo. She is from my manga, which you can read for free, Future Saviors, where I recently released part 3. If you enjoy graphic novels, or even if you're not sure, you may find this deeper, more adult-themed graphic novel interesting. I can't bust the story right open before it unfolds, but it's a serious story on how to live a life told through the prism of 3 characters, Saki, Hisao and Kaito. It will at times be quite humorous, sometimes quite adventurous, and sometimes downright heartbreaking. But overall, in the years to come, it's a story of real hope, a story that asks you, how are you going to live now? So if you want to go and check it out, why not check out the video description? Okay, back to Dpaint and animation. As I've said before, I find the process of trying to couch what I do on YouTube in direct educational terms, i.e. by saying do this, then do that, really hard going, and sometimes it's just much easier to respond to messages with specific questions on my techniques. I'd rather just get on with what I'm doing, talk about it broadly with some relevant comments or maybe even some irrelevant talking points, but just generally get on with it. So if what you see here raises questions on the techniques I'm using, just let me know in the comments below, or if you join me on Patreon, I'll give you more advice in a more one-to-one manner. I am using Deluxe Paint for the whole process, and I don't use the lightbox feature that was introduced in version 4 and 5 of the program. Instead, I flip between the frames quickly using the 1 and 2 keys on the keyboard to get a sense of the animation, a bit like what a traditional animator does by flipping the cells back and forth. The overall method is to create the first and final frames first. These are the keyframes, what I'm moving from and what I'm moving towards. Then I create the in-betweens by working from the midpoint and gradually working out towards the keyframes. So in this 6-frame animation, frame 1 is already created. Then I follow that by frame 6, then frame 3, then frame 2, and then frame 4, and finally frame 5, or something like that anyway. In terms of creating the movement of the hair, I block in the new hair position using a single colour, as the shading will be done last. Then I refine it by taking away colour or adding that colour. Think of it being a bit like using modelling clay. That way I can concentrate on the movement rather than putting in detail which will inevitably need changing otherwise. In terms of how hair moves, I think of it like a diminishing waveform, where the wind first contacts the tips of the hair, the wave is larger than it will be at the furthest distance that you are animating. So gradually the wave becomes less pronounced the further towards the hair root that it gets. Also, you don't generally want just one pivot point for the hair. You need 2 or 3 pivot points, as this will look much more natural. One pivot point will just look like a lever flapping up and down. For the far sleeve of Saki's t-shirt, think of a breeze pushing the fabric up the arm a little. That's what's happening, so the details of that sleeve should push and pull a little bit. A better word to use, perhaps other than push and pull, would be to jitter as it ripples. So again, it doesn't just move up the arm and then back down, but rather that it ripples or stutters as it does so. I find this can be mostly done with just the shading, where changing just a handful of pixels or where changing just the shadows can create a very believable rippling. The final steps are then to create an anim brush of this, and then set the anim brush to ping pong motion in Dpaint, and use the move requester to stamp it down over 360 frames. So a 6-frame anim brush in ping pong form will run to 10 frames in the full motion, meaning the overall animation will repeat 36 times across the 360 frames. Then the city background can be inserted using a stencil, as described in part 3 of this video series. So this is now looking really neat. In the 5th part of this video series, I want to manipulate the shading so that it looks like the street lights rolling past the window affect the overall amount of light inside the car, and hopefully also restore the street light highlights to the edge of Saki's punky hair. sometimes I feel like I have more I want to talk about in terms of how life in Japan is panning out, especially now that I'm mostly entirely absent from social media and streaming. In a way, I feel like I've actually logged out of the internet. But the only place you will find me these days is probably on Instagram, and I mostly use it as a gallery, but I do occasionally use the stories to share posts that I think rock, my skate fluff, and occasional artwork work in progresses. Of course, you'll also find me on Patreon as well. I think as I've regained on my terms the value of my own privacy and got on with whatever it is that I'm doing here in Japan, things are becoming so much clearer about how I want to live my life and what I value. In a way, I find myself having a feeling of having so much that I want to say, but that I no longer really want to say any of it out loud. I never really wanted to be the point of interest, if I'm honest. I just want what I do to be that point of interest, and I guess that's why I'm an artist. I think in the end, my thoughts on life will end up most vividly illustrated and stated in my manga Future Saviors, and of course across all of the artwork and other stories that I produce. I guess that's what I wanted all along, the artwork and stories to do the talking. If at the end of my life someone discards all that I created without a second glance onto the fire, then I still will have had a life of purpose, living it on my terms. Anyway, I'm off skating. See you soon. Peace.